Later on, fast forward to the death of Khadija radiallahu anha, the mother of Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha, the wife of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When Khadija passed away, she was, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would be attacked, because remember, Khadija died around the same time, only 3 days apart according to some narrations, from Abu Talib. So the Prophet ﷺ would be viciously attacked in public at this point now. He had no physical protection on the outside. And when the Prophet ﷺ would come home covered in blood, which by the way, according to some of the scholars of Sirah, there were 8 times that the Prophet ﷺ was publicly beaten. 8 times. So we know of Ta'if and we know, but 8 times that something was thrown on him, or he was punched, or he was hit. So when the Prophet ﷺ is in public, he's fair game. When he comes home wounded, it's Fatima radiallahu anha that takes the role of playing the role that Khadija radiallahu anha used to play. She's the one that really steps in and that starts to protect the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Al-Hasan radiallahu anhu says that Fatima would be the one to clean the wounds of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And how old was she? About 10 years old. Think about that burden. 10-year-old girl walking up to her father sallallahu alaihi wasallam, having to clean up his wounds and comfort him when Khadija radiallahu anha was missing. And everyone knew Fatima's closeness to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a 10-year-old girl. And at the age of 10, what was she nicknamed? Abiha, the mother of her father. Because of the hanan, the love and the compassion she would show to her father when she would see the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam struck. Abiha. It's like she was another mother to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And one of the most painful narrations, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam hated to see her in pain. Absolutely hated to see her in pain, because he knew this is a young girl that's been exposed. She didn't see the days of comfort and ease, which were really, right before prophethood, where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was at the max of his wealth, of his credibility in society. She didn't have that childhood. Her childhood was all oppression. Her childhood was witnessing her father rejected, beaten, her mother becoming frail, dying due to the boycott. She witnessed all the hardship. And one of the most painful narrations, and this was the peak of humiliation of the Prophet ﷺ, was that because now he's fair game and they'd kick him in public, punch him in public, humiliate him, spit at him in public, Abu Jahl challenged Uqba bin Abi Mu'ayt. Uqba bin Abi Mu'ayt, who was a powerful man in Mecca. And these are now the elites playing games with the Prophet ﷺ at this point. Abu Talib's not here, we're not showing him any regard whatsoever. And the Prophet ﷺ has been rejected from Ta'if, he doesn't have anyone to protect him. Abu Jahl he challenges Uqba bin Abi Mu'ayt, he says, you really want to humiliate him? He said next time he comes to the Kaaba, because the Prophet ﷺ would still walk to the Kaaba and pray, even as they'd kick him, even as they'd spit on him, he'd still go and pray by himself. He doesn't have Khadija radiallahu anha with him anymore. He says to Uqba bin Abi Mu'ayt, why don't you take the insides of a camel, slaughter a camel and take all of its guts, all of its intestines, all of its nastiness, collect them, and the next time the Prophet ﷺ is praying in front of the Kaaba, go dump them on his back. This is just complete humiliation, right? Utter humiliation. So Uqba bin Abi Mu'ayt, of course, he says yes. And Uqba bin Abi Mu'ayt was a huge man, size of Abu Jahl and Umar, big man. And so he collected all of that filth, and they watched the Prophet ﷺ, waited for him to go into sajda, into prostration, and then he came and he dumped it all on the back of the Prophet ﷺ. And it was so heavy on the back of the Prophet ﷺ that it caused his body to collapse. So it wasn't like just the filth, right? Complete humiliation. Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, he narrates this incident, because Ibn Mas'ud was someone that was almost beaten to death already next to the Kaaba. We'll talk about him at some point. He was a small man, didn't have a tribe, didn't have any protection. So he goes to the house of the Prophet ﷺ to let the household know what had happened. The only one he finds, 10-year-old girl, Fatima radiallahu anha, and tells Fatima that your father, what's happening to her father, that your father has been crushed by these camel guts, he's being humiliated, everyone's laughing at him, mocking him. And Fatima radiallahu anha comes running out of her house to the haram, goes to the Prophet ﷺ, crying so heavily, and scratching the guts off of the back of the Prophet ﷺ. Think of that scene. Right? This is the daughter of the woman that held him when he received revelation. And think about how painful it was for the Prophet ﷺ. Right? This is, you never want to see your children see you like that, right? This is a next level of humiliation. So, and this is a long narration, the Prophet ﷺ, this was one of the only times he actually prayed against his people. Meaning he prayed against Abu Jahl, made dua against him. It's not often that the Prophet ﷺ makes dua against an oppressor. Almost always his prayers are for them. But he actually makes dua against Abu Jahl and Uqba bin Abi Mu'ayt. In that moment, he sees the pain of Fatima radiallahu anha. He comforts her, and listen what he says. He says, La tabki, don't cry. Inna Allah nasirun abaki. God will support your father. Allah will give victory to your father. Don't cry. Allah will give victory to your father. And it didn't calm her tears. So the Prophet ﷺ, that's when he raised his hands and he prayed against Abu Jahl and Uqba bin Abi Mu'ayt and those that had humiliated the Prophet ﷺ in front of his father. Another narration after Khadija had died, where the Prophet ﷺ sees Fathima radiallahu anha again. This is a girl that's been through what no girl should have to go through, right? That deeply loves her father, witnessed that pain. And he says to her, كَيْفَ تَجِدِينَكِ Ya bunayyati, how are you, O my daughter? And she says, Inni lawaji'a, I'm in pain. Wa innahu layazidu ma bi anna mali ta'amun akulahu. Said, what's increasing my pain even is we don't even have food to eat. Right? The Prophet ﷺ did not even have food. Right? He goes days and nights hungry, and she's saying we don't have food, so I'm in emotional pain and I'm in physical pain. So the Prophet ﷺ responds and he says, O my daughter, أَلَا تَرْضِينِ أَنَّكِ سَيِّدَةُ نِسَاءِ الْعَالَمِينَ. He said, O my beautiful daughter, aren't you pleased that you are the master of all women? You are the leader of all women, the women of all the world. Look at the knowledge, understanding, adab of this young girl, Fatima radiallahu anha. She says, Ya abati, fa'ayna Maryam ibnata Imran. She said, oh my father, but then where is Mary, the mother of Jesus? What about Maryam? How could I be the leader of the women of the world? What about Maryam? So the Prophet ﷺ said, Tilka sayyidatu nisa'i alimiha. فعلى هذا مريم خير نساء الأمة الماضية وخديجة خير نساء الأمة الكائنة. He said that she was the leader of the women of her time. And in that sense, Maryam was the best woman of her times, and Khadija was the best woman of her times. So there's a difference between Sayyida and Khayru. The best woman of all time is Maryam, and the best woman of her time is your mother Khadija. And Fatima radiallahu anha is one of those who perfected her faith. So the Prophet ﷺ mentioned 4 women who perfected their faith, had perfect faith, and that was Maryam, Asiya, Khadija, Fatima. So Fatima and her mother, imagine 2 women that had perfect iman, right? That had perfect faith. And some of the scholars, they said, why Fatima? Why does she have perfect faith and not the other daughters of the Prophet ﷺ? They were surely beloved to the Prophet ﷺ. But why Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha? And some of the scholars, they said, number one, this is a gift from Allah that Allah gives to people, right? This is, Fatima would exert herself in worship, and you'll see her in her lifetime. She resembles the Prophet ﷺ more than any other human being. We'll talk about that. No one resembles the Prophet like Fatima. She was a copy of the Prophet ﷺ, and that translated also into her nobility, her worship. Some of them said because she was born into the days of hardship, and as opposed to her sister, she grew up watching her father tortured, and she was the one playing the role of Khadija, supporting the Prophet ﷺ. She spent her 3 years of her childhood in the boycott. She never saw the days of wealth like the other children of the Prophet ﷺ. She made the hijrah with her father. So she actually migrated with the Prophet ﷺ to Medina at the age of 13 years old.